A harsh childhood. In the wealthy town of Emadolobeni, a beautiful and intelligent girl named Zobukle was born into a life of comfort. She was loved dearly by her father, Bekizitha, and grew up in a home filled with warmth and luxury. But everything changed when her mother passed away. The loss was already painful, but what came next turned her life into a nightmare. Bekizitha remarried a woman named Nomthandazo, who was nothing like Zobuli's mother. On the outside, she pretended to be kind and loving, but deep down, she was greedy and heartless. She had a daughter of her own, Hlengiwe, and from the moment she entered the house, she saw Zobuli as a threat. She wanted all of Bekizitha's love, attention, and wealth to go to her own daughter. Slowly, Nomthandazo started poisoning Bekizitha's mind. She told him that Zobula was useless, disrespectful, and unworthy of his love. At first, Bekizitha didn't believe it, but over time, he became blind to the truth. The once beloved Zobule was now treated like a stranger in her own home. Her life turned from happiness to misery. She was no longer the daughter of the house. She was the servant. While Hlengiwe dressed in expensive clothes, ate the best food, and lived like a princess, Zobula was forced to do all the household chores. She cleaned, cooked, and washed, while her stepmother and stepsister enjoyed the luxury that was once hers. But no matter how much they tried to break her, Zobule refused to lose hope. Deep in her heart, she knew that one day things would change. One day, she would rise above all the pain and prove them wrong. Zobule's life became worse with each passing day. Her father, Bekizitha, who once adored her, had now completely changed. He was blinded by his love for his new wife, Nomthandazo, and her daughter, Hlengiwe. No matter what Nomthandazo said, he believed it without question. She told him that Zobule was lazy, disrespectful, and a burden to the family. She painted her as a girl who did not deserve love, and sadly, Bekizitha listened. Instead of seeing the truth, he spoiled Hlengiwe, treating her like a princess while he ignored Zobule's suffering. Zobule, who once had everything, was now treated like a servant in her own home. She was given old, torn clothes while Hlengiwe wore the finest dresses. While her stepsister ate fresh, delicious meals, Zobule was given leftovers, sometimes even food that had gone bad. At night, when everyone went to sleep in their warm, comfortable beds, Zobule was forced to sleep in a small, cold storage room. The room was dark, with only a thin blanket to keep her warm. There were nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering why her father had stopped loving her. But no matter how much pain she felt, she refused to break. Deep inside, she knew she was worth more than the way she was being treated. Her stepmother did everything to make her life miserable. Whenever guests came to visit, Nomthandazo made sure Zobule stayed out of sight. She didn't want anyone to see how beautiful and intelligent the girl was. She was afraid that if people noticed Zobule's potential, they might start asking questions. So, she made sure Zobule spent all her time doing house chores. From morning until night, she scrubbed the floors, cooked food she wasn't allowed to eat, and washed clothes that weren't hers. If she dared to rest, even for a moment, Nomthandazo would punish her with more work. But the worst part was school. Zobule loved learning, but her stepmother saw no reason for her to be educated. Why waste money on a useless girl, Nomthandazo would say. She wanted all resources to go to Hlengiwe, making sure Zobule had no chance of a better future. Sometimes, she even made excuses for Zobule to stay home from school so she could work in the house. When she did go to school, she had to wear old, oversized uniforms that barely fit her. Other students laughed at her, calling her names, but she refused to let it break her spirit. One day, when everything seemed hopeless, Zobule met someone who changed her life, Gogo Lwandle, an old teacher at her school. Gogo Lwandle saw the sadness in Zobule's eyes and knew something was wrong. She started paying attention and realized that Zobule was not like the other students. She was brilliant, always eager to learn, but there was a deep pain behind her determination. Gogo Lwandle took it upon herself to help Zobule. Since Nomthandazo didn't care about her education, the teacher secretly gave her extra lessons after school. She taught her more than what was in the textbooks. She taught her about life, about strength, and about believing in herself. "You are not what they say you are, my child," Gogo Lwandle would tell her. "You are destined for great things. Don't let them break you." Zobule held on to those words like a lifeline. No matter how much she suffered at home, she reminded herself that she was not useless. She was smart, she was strong, and one day, she would leave this place behind. She started dreaming of a future where she was no longer a servant, but a powerful woman who controlled her own destiny. She dreamed of escaping, of proving everyone wrong. She imagined a day when she would walk into a room dressed in fine clothes, successful and independent, while her stepmother and stepsister watched in shock. She wanted to show them that the girl they had tried to destroy had become greater than they could ever imagine. But for now, all she could do was wait. She had no idea how or when, but she knew deep in her heart that her time would come. Until then, she would endure, she would learn, and most importantly, she would never give up. Bekizitha frowned, confused by his wife's words. He had long stopped paying attention to Zobule, believing everything Nomthandazo told him. But this time, she spoke with such urgency that he couldn't ignore it. "What do you mean?" he asked, setting his glass down. Nomthandazo sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "People in town are talking," she whispered. "They say she is wild, that she brings shame to this family. If we don't do something, no respectable man will ever want to marry Hlengiwe. Our name will be ruined because of that girl." Bekizitha didn't respond at first. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice questioned if what she was saying was true. But Nomthandazo had spent years turning him against his daughter, feeding him lies until he could no longer tell truth from fiction. He rubbed his temples and let out a tired breath. "What do you suggest we do?" A slow, satisfied smile touched Nomthandazo's lips, though she quickly masked it with a look of concern. "Send her away," she said, "far away, to a distant village where no one will ever hear of her again. Let her live with distant relatives, somewhere she can't embarrass us anymore." Bekizitha hesitated. "She's still my daughter," he murmured, but the words felt weak. Nomthandazo placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "And that is why you must do this, for her own good, for our family's reputation. If you don't, we will all suffer because of her." That was all it took. With a tired nod, Bekizitha agreed, sealing his daughter's fate without a second thought. The next evening, Nomthandazo wasted no time putting her plan into action, but she had no intention of sending Zobule to a village. She wanted her gone forever. She called two of her most trusted men, dangerous, heartless people who would do anything for money. She handed them a heavy bag of coins and whispered her instructions carefully. They nodded, understanding exactly what needed to be done. That night, as Zobule lay in her cold storage room, exhausted from a long day of endless chores, the door suddenly swung open. Harsh hands grabbed her before she could react. Panic surged through her as she was dragged out of the house, her cries swallowed by the darkness. "Where are you taking me?" she pleaded, struggling against their grip. No one answered. The men shoved her into a cart and covered her with a thick cloth, blocking out the moonlight. The journey was long and rough. The road beneath the cart was bumpy, the air filled with the scent of damp earth and fear. Every time she tried to move, the men would shove her back down, warning her to stay quiet. Hours passed before the cart finally stopped. Zobule's heart pounded as rough hands yanked her out. She stumbled to the ground, her knees scraping against the cold, hard earth. When she looked around, her blood ran cold. She was in the middle of a vast, dark forest. Tall trees loomed over her, their twisted branches reaching out like claws. The air was thick with the sounds of the night, distant howls, the rustling of unseen creatures. The men stared at her without emotion. One of them tossed a small bundle at her feet, a piece of stale bread and a half-empty bottle of water. "This is all you get," he said, his voice void of sympathy. Zobule's breath came in shaky gasps. "Please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why you're doing this, but my father—" The man let out a cruel laugh. "Your father?" He shook his head. "He agreed to send you away. He doesn't care where you end up." The words cut deeper than any blade. Her own father had given up on her, had allowed this to happen. Without another word, the men turned and climbed back into the cart. The wheels groaned as they rolled away, leaving her alone in the endless darkness. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The fear clawed at her chest. The hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she pushed it all aside. She would not die here. She refused to let Nomthandazo win. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to stand. If no one was coming to save her, she would save herself. The night felt endless. Cold wind whispered through the trees, making the branches sway like dark figures reaching out for her. Zobule shivered, her thin dress doing little to protect her from the icy air. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and fear sat heavy in her chest. Every sound in the forest, every rustling leaf, every distant howl felt like a threat. She had never been this alone before. She tried to stay strong, but her body was giving up. She hadn't eaten in hours, and the little water she had been given was long gone. Her legs felt weak, her head dizzy. She stumbled forward, not even sure where she was going. The forest seemed endless, stretching in every direction with no way out. Her foot caught on a root, and she collapsed onto the hard ground. Pain shot through her knees, but she didn't have the strength to get up. Lying there in the dirt, she thought about everything that had happened: her father's betrayal, her stepmother's cruelty, the life she had lost. For the first time, she let herself cry. Silent, painful sobs shook her body. Was this how her story would end? Alone and forgotten. Just as she was about to close her eyes, ready to give in to exhaustion, she heard something. Footsteps, slow and steady, moving towards her. Fear jolted through her body, but she was too weak to run. She braced herself for the worst. A soft voice broke through the darkness. "My child, what are you doing here?" Zabula forced her eyes open. A figure stood above her, wrapped in a thick shawl. The woman's face was lined with age, her eyes filled with wisdom and kindness. She knelt down, placing a gentle hand on Zabula's forehead. "You are burning up," the woman murmured, concern in her voice. "Come, we must get you warm." Zabula wanted to speak, to ask who she was, but the world around her was spinning. Before she could say anything, everything faded into black. When she woke up, she was lying on a soft mat inside a small, warm hut. The scent of herbs filled the air, and a pot of something hot was bubbling over a fire. The old woman sat nearby, watching her with a patient smile. "You are safe now," she said. "My name is Mama Vuyiswa." Zobule tried to sit up, but her body was still weak. Why did you help me?" she whispered. Mama Vuyiswa chuckled. "Because fate brought you to me, and because I know a strong spirit when I see one." Over the next few days, Zobule slowly regained her strength. Mama Vuyiswa cared for her like a grandmother, feeding her warm meals, giving her soft blankets, and speaking words that healed more than just her body. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Mama Vuyiswa studied her carefully. "Tell me, child," she said, "what is it that you dream of?" Zobula hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before, but deep down, she knew the answer. "I want more than this," she said. "I want to be someone. I want to prove that I am not worthless." Mama Vuyiswa nodded, as if she had been waiting for this. "Then listen carefully," she said. "I will teach you something that will change your life." And so, the lessons began. Mama Vuyiswa was no ordinary woman. She had lived a long life, had traveled, had learned things that most people never did. She taught Zobula how to trade, how to buy and sell, how to recognize quality and value. She explained the power of business, the importance of working smart. "You see, my child," she said one night, "money is power, and power is freedom. If you want to control your own destiny, you must learn how to make it on your own." Zobula listened to every word, soaking up the knowledge like a sponge. She had never felt more alive. For the first time in her life, she was learning something that could truly change her future. Then, one morning, Mama Vuyiswa handed her a small pouch filled with coins. "It is time," she said. "I have a friend in eThekwini, a man who owns a clothing store. He can give you work, a chance to start fresh." Zobula stared at the pouch in shock. "But why are you helping me?" The old woman smiled. "Because I see who you..." The journey to eThekwini was long, but Zobula held on to hope with every step. She had nothing but a small bag of clothes, a few coins from Mama Vuyiswa, and a heart full of determination. When she finally arrived in the bustling city, she was overwhelmed. Tall buildings stretched towards the sky, cars honked in crowded streets, and people rushed past her, each chasing their own dreams. She made her way to the clothing store Mama Vuyiswa had told her about. It was a small but elegant shop, filled with colorful fabrics and beautifully designed clothes. Nervous but determined, she stepped inside and introduced herself to the owner, Mr. Jabulani, a stern but kind man in his late 50s. "I don't have experience," she admitted, "but I am willing to work hard." Mr. Jabulani studied her for a moment before nodding. "Hard work is more important than experience," he said. "You can start as a cleaner." The job was tough. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, she swept the floors, dusted the shelves, and polished the windows until they shone. She never complained, never slacked. While others saw her as just a cleaner, she saw herself as a student. Every day, as she worked, she watched and listened. She observed how customers reacted to different fabrics, how Mr. Jabulani spoke to suppliers, how he handled money. One afternoon, a frustrated customer stormed in, complaining about a dress she had bought. Mr. Jabulani was busy, and the other workers hesitated, unsure of what to do. Zobula, without thinking twice, stepped forward. "I'm sorry for the trouble, ma'am," she said calmly. "Tell me what's wrong, and we'll fix it." The woman, taken aback by Zobula's confidence, explained the issue. Instead of arguing, Zobula listened carefully and quickly found a solution. By the time Mr. Jabulani returned, the customer was smiling, satisfied with the help she had received. After that day, Mr. Jabulani started paying attention to her. "You have a sharp mind," he told her. "Would you like to learn more about the business?" She nodded eagerly, and that was when her real education began. Every evening after the store closed, Mr. Jabulani sat her down and taught her about fashion, fabrics, customer service, and most importantly, business. She learned how to negotiate prices, how to spot quality, how to attract customers. He even let her help with small tasks, trusting her with responsibilities beyond cleaning. Years passed, and Zobula grew from a simple worker into a skilled businesswoman. She saved every coin she earned, and with Mr. Jabulani's guidance, she slowly built her dream. One day, she took a deep breath, looked at herself in the mirror, and made the biggest decision of her life. It was time to start her own brand. With her savings, she rented a tiny space in the market and bought a few rolls of fabric. She designed her first dresses by hand, sewing late into the night, pushing herself beyond exhaustion. At first, customers were few, but those who bought from her were amazed. Her designs were fresh, unique, and made with love. Word spread, and soon, more people came. She named her brand Zobula Designs, a reminder of who she was and where she had come from. As her business grew, she faced challenges. Some people doubted her, saying she was too young, too inexperienced. Others tried to cheat her, to bring her down, but she refused to give up. She worked harder, learned faster, and never lost sight of her dream. One day, something incredible happened. A famous fashion influencer visited her shop and fell in love with her designs. She posted about them online, and within hours, Zobula's work went viral. Orders flooded in from across the country, then from other parts of Africa. She expanded her business, opening more stores, hiring more workers, empowering other young women just like her. In a few short years, the girl who once had nothing became one of the youngest and most successful entrepreneurs in the country. People spoke her name with admiration. Newspapers wrote about her. TV shows invited her to share her story. But through it all, she remained the same, strong, kind, and determined. She had proven them all wrong. The girl they abandoned, the girl they called useless, had built an empire, and she was just getting started. The life of luxury that Nomthandazo and Hlengiwe once enjoyed slowly crumbled before their eyes. Bekizitha, blinded by his wife's influence, had made reckless business decisions, trusting the wrong people and spending money carelessly. He believed that their wealth would last forever, but greed and arrogance always come with a price. At first, the downfall came in whispers, business deals failing, trusted partners walking away, debts piling up. Bekizitha ignored the warning sign, convinced that things would fix themselves, but soon the whispers turned into a storm. His company collapsed under the weight of bad investments, and one by one, their expensive cars, designer clothes, and servants disappeared. The grand mansion that had once been filled with laughter and extravagant parties became a cold, empty space. Nomthandazo, who had once walked through Amadolobeni with her head held high, now faced the harsh truth. No one cared about her anymore. The same women who had praised her at lavish gatherings now avoided her in public. Invitations stopped coming. Friends turned away. She had built her entire life around status and money, and without them, she was nothing. Hlengiwe, who had never worked a day in her life, struggled the most. She had been raised to believe that wealth was her birthright, that she would always be treated like a princess. But now, reality hit her like a storm. There were no more maids to serve her, no more expensive gifts from her father. She had never learned how to survive without privilege, and the world had no sympathy for her. With no money left, they were forced to leave their mansion and move into a tiny, run-down house in a poor neighborhood. The walls were cracked, the roof leaked when it rained, and the air smelled of despair. Nomthandazo, who had once commanded servants with a snap of her fingers, now had to cook, clean, and beg for jobs. But no one wanted to hire her. People still remembered how cruel she had been when she was rich, and now they wanted nothing to do with her. Betrayal, broken and ashamed, spent his days sitting in silence, staring at the walls. He had ignored his daughter, thrown away the only person who had truly loved him, all for a woman who had now led him to ruin. Regret weighed on him like chains, but it was too late to undo the past. Nomthandazo and Hlengiwe had spent years looking down on others, treating them as less than human. Now, they were the ones suffering, and no one pitied them. They had laughed at Zobula's pain, pushed her aside like she was worthless. But fate has a way of balancing the scales, and now, the same girl they had tried to destroy was rising higher than they had ever imagined, while they fell lower than they ever thought possible. Nomthandazo and Hlengiwe had never imagined their lives would come to this. Once, they had servants at their command, endless luxury, and the respect of society. Now, they wandered the city, desperate for work, rejected at every turn. Hunger and humiliation had stripped away their pride. One day, exhausted and hopeless, they found themselves standing outside a grand clothing store. The golden letters above the entrance read, Zobule Designs. They had heard of this store before. Everyone had. It belonged to one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the country. Without knowing whose store it was, they stepped inside, hoping for a job. The moment they entered, they froze. The elegant displays, the shimmering fabrics, the well-dressed customers. It was a world far beyond their reach now. But what shocked them most was the woman standing at the counter, dressed in a powerful suit, confidence radiating from her. Zobula, their breath caught in their throats. The girl they had abandoned, humiliated, and thrown away was now standing before them, more powerful than they had ever been. Nomthandazo's legs felt weak. She lowered her head, shame washing over her like a wave. Hlengiwe, who had once mocked Zobule, couldn't even meet her eyes. Zobule studied them, her expression unreadable. She had imagined this moment before, how it would feel to see them begging, how she would make them suffer like they had made her suffer. But as she looked at them now, broken and helpless, she felt no joy in their pain. After a long silence, Nomthandazo swallowed her pride and spoke. We are looking for work." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Zobule could have laughed. She could have thrown them out, reminded them of every cruel thing they had done to her. Instead, she simply nodded. "There is work here," she said, "as cleaners." The words hit like a slap. Nomthandazo and Hlengiwe had once forced Zobule to clean their mansion, treating her like a servant. Now, they were being offered the same fate. Nomthandazo's lips trembled, but she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. As they walked toward their new roles, heads bowed, Zobule watched them go. This was not revenge, it was justice. Life had come full circle, and fate had given them exactly what they deserved. Nomthandazo sat alone in the tiny room she now called home, staring at the empty walls. Once she had everything: wealth, power, respect. Now she had nothing. And the worst part? She knew it was her own doing. She had ruined the one person who could have saved her. If she had treated Zobule with kindness, if she had supported her instead of destroying her, maybe life would have been different. But regret came too late. Betrayal, too, felt the weight of his mistakes. He had allowed himself to be blinded by love for a woman who only cared about herself. He had ignored his own daughter, pushed her away, and now she was out of his reach. He had once been a powerful businessman, feared and respected. Now he was just an old man drowning in regret. One day, he gathered the courage to visit Zobule, but when he saw her from a distance, surrounded by success, he couldn't bring himself to approach. She had moved on, and he no longer had a place in her life. Tears filled his eyes as he walked away, knowing he had lost her forever. Zobule, despite everything, did not let hatred consume her. She had learned that revenge was not in destroying others. It was in proving them wrong. She had done that. She had risen above the pain, turned her suffering into strength, and built an empire from nothing. She did not need to punish them. Life had already done that for her. One day, as she watched Nomthandazo and Hlengiwe quietly cleaning her store, she felt no anger. She only saw two people who had once tried to break her, but had now been broken by life itself. She walked past them without a word, her silence louder than any revenge she could have taken. She forgave them, but she would never forget. And that was the greatest lesson of all. Success was the best revenge, and karma never failed. Zobula's empire only grew bigger, her name shining across Africa. Young girls looked up to her, seeing her as proof that no struggle was too great to overcome. She shared her story, teaching them to chase their dreams no matter who doubted them. But success wasn't just about money. She built a new family, true friends, loyal employees, and a loving home filled with warmth. She no longer needed the love she once begged for. She had created a life where she was valued, respected, and truly happy. Zobula had won, not through revenge, but by rising above it all. True wealth is not just about money. It is about strength, kindness, and never giving up. Zobula had once been powerless, treated like nothing, but she never let her pain define her. She turned her struggles into power and became greater than anyone ever imagined. Karma never forgets. Nomtandazo and Helengiwe once lived in luxury, believing they were untouchable. But cruelty always finds its way back, and in the end, they lost everything. The same girl they tried to destroy became the one standing above them. Never underestimate the underdog. The ones you push down today may rise higher than you tomorrow. Zobul's journey proves that true strength comes from within. No matter how many obstacles life throws at you, never stop believing in yourself. Hard work, patience, and resilience will always lead to victory. Those who underestimate you today may one day look up to you in awe. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more inspiring content and share it with your friends and family. Let's spread the message that no dream is too big and no struggle is too powerful to break a determined soul. Keep believing, keep pushing, and watch how life turns in your favor.